Aloan wasn't supposed to open that door. Caspa's house ran in silence, on rules so strict that even the walls seemed to listen. Every corridor, every clock tick, every camera existed to enforce his control. Nothing entered without permission. Nothing moved unseen. But that night, rain changed everything. Barefoot and shaking, Aloan slipped through the shadows with a muddy dog trembling in her arms. One bark, just one, could expose her, trigger alarms, summon consequences she was too young to understand. Yet she moved anyway, guided by something stronger than fear. Compassion. By morning, Caspa would return. And when he did, the dog would be discovered, judged, and removed. That was the rule. What no one anticipated was this. The animal would see what Caspa's empire could not. As men gathered beneath chandeliers and loyalty masqueraded as obedience, the dog would sense betrayal hiding behind tailored suits and practiced smiles. It would stand where no man dared. It would choose instinct over fear. This is not a story about a powerful man saving a child. It's about a child who trusted the wrong creature, and a creature who saved them all. If you're hooked, stay with me till the very end of the story. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I've got so many incredible stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. Alright, let's get back to the story. Aloan pressed the door open just enough to slip through, her small frame swallowed by the shadows of the long corridor. In her arms, the dog wriggled, muddy paws smearing her nightgown and a low, uncertain whine escaping its throat. The mansion was silent, every polished surface and marble floor amplifying the faint squeak of her slippers. She paused at the top of the stairs, glancing toward the grand entrance hall where the faint hum of the security system marked the boundary of Caspa's control. One wrong step, one accidental clatter, and the entire house would know she had broken the rule. "Shoo, you have to be quiet," she whispered, stroking the dog's damp fur. The animal's eyes, wide and trusting, blinked up at her, ears flattened. Despite its size, despite the danger, it seemed to understand the gravity of their mission. Aloan took a deep breath and stepped into the mudroom, the door clicking softly behind her. The dog's nails scraped against the stone floor, sending a tremor of sound through the cavernous space. She froze. A bark erupted, short, sharp, almost panicked, and bounced off the walls. Aloan's heart leapt. The sound was louder than she expected, echoing in the mansion like a gunshot. She squeezed the dog closer, whispering reassurances, but the animal's tail thumped against the floor, anxious and alert. The echo of that single bark seemed to stir the house itself, as though every silent corner had been holding its breath and now exhaled in shock. The mudroom smelled of wet stone and rain. The dog shook, sending droplets across the tiled floor. Aloan wrapped her arms tighter around it, shushing it again, willing it to remain unseen. The corridors outside were empty, the distant ticking of clocks and hum of Caspa's security system the only witnesses to their intrusion. She placed the dog down gently, letting it slink into a corner behind a row of boots and umbrellas. It sniffed the air, ears twitching, tail low, muscles coiled like it was ready for something unseen. Aloan crouched beside it, smoothing its fur with trembling hands. "Nobody has to know," she murmured. "It's just us." For a moment, the dog tilted its head, looking up at her as if it understood the stakes, as if it had chosen her for a reason she could not yet grasp. A shiver ran down her spine. Somewhere deep in the house, she imagined Caspa's eyes on them, though she knew he was far away in his study, plotting, calculating, always watching. Outside, rain pelted the roof in steady drumming, a quiet storm echoing the tumult in her chest. The dog lay still, finally settling, but every so often, it let out a soft whine, a reminder of its wildness, its instinct, and its presence in the forbidden sanctuary. Aloan pressed her forehead to its head, feeling the warmth against her cheek. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though the truth of it felt uncertain. In the shadowed mansion, beneath the rule of silence and order, a muddy intruder had arrived, and the quiet tremor of its paws promised that nothing in Caspa's world would ever be the same. The sharp click of the study door echoed through the empty hall as Caspa stepped inside, his presence cutting through the silence like a knife. He had returned earlier than expected, the weight of his coat heavy on his broad shoulders, the faint scent of cigar smoke trailing behind him. His eyes, always cold, swept the room with precision, scanning every corner, every shadow. Nothing escaped him. And yet, the moment his gaze fell on the mudroom, on the small, trembling figure of a dog huddled behind the boots, something inside him snapped. "Aloan," he called, voice low but carrying the authority that silenced even the ticking clocks. The girl froze, her small hands clutching her nightgown, and the dog stiffened, ears pinned back, sensing the storm it had unknowingly entered. Caspa's eyes narrowed, the usual calculation giving way to a rare, sharp fury. "Explain this," he demanded, gesturing at the muddy creature. "Now." Aloan swallowed hard, stepping forward with hesitant courage. I found him outside, Papa. He was all alone in the rain, and I thought." Her voice broke, and the dog whimpered softly, nuzzling against her leg as if to punctuate her plea. Caspa's jaw tightened. His control, the invisible lattice of rules and order he had built around his life, felt violated. The house, his sanctuary, had been breached by something he could neither predict nor command. He walked slowly toward them, each step measured, each breath deliberate. The dog growled softly, a warning, a challenge, and Caspa's hand instinctively tightened around the edge of his chair. "You know the rules," he said, voice cold as steel. "Nothing enters this house that I cannot control. Nothing." His eyes flicked to Aloan, hard and unyielding. "And yet you have brought me this beast?" He paused, letting the weight of his words hang like a guillotine. "Do you understand what this means?" Aloan's throat tightened, but she nodded, unwilling to hide. "Yes, Papa. But he's not dangerous. He's loyal." Caspa's lips pressed into a thin line, his mind racing through contingencies, betrayals, and the potential for chaos. The thought of leaving the dog here, unsupervised, untested, was intolerable. And yet, he hesitated, drawn by the girl's earnest eyes, by the unwavering faith she seemed to place in this creature. "Until dawn," he said finally, voice dropping to a low growl that vibrated through the room. "By sunrise, this dog leaves my house. If it is still here, I will remove it myself." His gaze shifted to the animal, sharp and calculating, as if measuring the threat it posed to his entire existence. The dog, sensing the danger, stayed motionless, eyes locked on him, tail tucked, body taut. Aloan nodded quickly, relief mingling with fear. She bent to stroke the dogs for one last time before Caspa turned and walked away, the echo of his steps filling the hallway. The mansion fell into uneasy silence once more, the storm outside matching the tension inside. Aloan pressed her forehead to the dog's head, whispering, "We have until dawn. We'll be okay." And in that quiet, forbidden moment, a fragile alliance formed, one that neither Caspa nor the world outside would ever anticipate. The house had settled into its usual night rhythm, the low hum of the security system, the distant drip of water from the rain-soaked roof, and the faint creak of settling wood. Aloan lay in bed, wide-eyed, listening to the dog breathing softly at her door. It was an enormous creature, its frame dwarfing the small threshold, yet it stayed perfectly still, ears swiveling, muscles coiled, eyes alert. She could feel the weight of its presence, a protective force she had never experienced before, and for the first time in weeks, a flicker of safety brushed against her racing heart. She reached out a hand, the warmth of her fingers brushing the dog's damp fur. "Thank you for staying," she whispered, though the words were meant more for herself than the animal. The dog's eyes softened for a moment, and then it returned to its silent sentinel stance, scanning the hall with unwavering attention. Outside, the mansion stretched in endless shadows, every corner a potential threat, every door a barrier to safety. Yet here, in the small circle of light from her nightstand, she felt a fragile peace. Meanwhile, Caspa sat in his control room, the glow of multiple CCTV monitors painting his face in shades of gray. He watched the dog from every angle, the mudroom, the corridor, the hall outside Alohan's room. The creature moved with a discipline that was almost mechanical, yet instinctively attuned to its charge. It flinched at nothing, barked at nothing, but always returned to its post, unwavering, vigilant. Caspa leaned back, hands steepled, intrigued. He had trained men, mercenaries, killers, men who would follow his command without hesitation, but none had the quiet, calculating loyalty this animal displayed. The night dragged on, minutes stretching into hours, and still the dog remained. Occasionally, it lifted its head, sniffing the air, ears twitching as though aware of something Caspa himself could not detect. And Alohan, in her small bed, felt the weight of that protection, the courage that radiated from the creature despite its fear. She drifted into fitful sleep, the dog never leaving her threshold, a silent guardian against a world she was too young to face alone. Caspa studied the monitors with a careful intensity. The dog was no ordinary animal. It had presence, awareness, intelligence. It was disciplined, yet affectionate, cautious, yet fearless. It followed Alohan's every movement with an almost reverent patience, never imposing, never seeking attention, yet making its authority clear. Something stirred in Caspa's chest, something he had long buried beneath rules, fear, and control, a trace of admiration, an acknowledgement that loyalty could exist outside fear, that protection could come in forms he had never considered. By the time the first gray light of dawn seeped through the windows, the dog had not budged. Caspa turned away from the monitors reluctantly, mind racing. He had come to enforce a decree, a rule carved in iron. The dog must leave. But after watching the night unfold, seeing the quiet bond, the unwavering discipline, and the silent courage, he realized that perhaps some rules were meant to be tested, and that sometimes trust and loyalty could emerge from the most unlikely places. The first car arrived just as the sun's pale light touched the estate, its tires crunching softly against the gravel drive. One by one, black sedans pulled up, each vehicle immaculate, silent except for the faint whisper of hydraulics settling. Caspa stood in the study, hands behind his back, watching the monitors. The dog remained at Alohan's door, motionless, eyes glinting in the dim glow of dawn, while Alohan tried to hide her excitement, pressing her face to the glass of her window. Outside, the storm that had begun as rain the night before had tapered to a steady drizzle, but inside the mansion, a different storm brewed, one of anticipation, suspicion, and unspoken calculations. The inner circle entered the grand hall one by one, polished shoes and tailored suits marking their allegiance. Yet even in their careful presentation, Caspa noted the small tells, a flicker of hesitation in their eyes, the subtle tightening of fists, the almost imperceptible tilt of a head. The air felt heavier with each arrival, thick with unspoken rivalries and veiled agendas. Caspa allowed no one to speak first, letting the silence stretch, each second a measured test. The room seemed to shrink around the weight of expectation, every ornate chandelier casting sharp shadows that mirrored the hidden dangers in the faces before him. Alohan watched from the stairs, her small figure barely visible behind the banister. The dog's low growl rumbled from the hallway, a quiet reminder of its presence and purpose. It was the first time she had seen the men fully assembled, their confidence and arrogance stark against the backdrop of her father's icy control. Some exchanged quick glances, subtle acknowledgments of alliances within the ranks, while others stood rigid, waiting for the order that might never come. Caspa's gaze swept over them, slow and deliberate. He sensed more than he could see. Every breath, every twitch, every slight shift in posture was a note in the symphony of betrayal he had learned to read over decades. He allowed the tension to build, letting the men feel the weight of their own uncertainty. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a test, a crucible where loyalty would be measured not in words, but in presence, in silence, in the shadows of intent. The dog shifted slightly, just enough to draw a faint line in the air, its senses attuned to subtleties Caspa had trained men to ignore. Aloan's hand rested on the banister, gripping it tightly, and in that moment, she felt the full gravity of her father's world, an empire built on fear, trust, and ruthless precision. The room hummed with unspoken tension, each second stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. Outside, the storm clouds finally began to break, streaks of light piercing the gray sky. But within the grand hall, darkness lingered, a quiet promise that by nightfall, nothing would remain unchanged. Caspa finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with authority, slicing through the charged atmosphere. "Loyalty is not given. It is proven," he said, letting the words hang. And in the shadowed corners, in the eyes of his men, and in the unwavering gaze of the dog at Aloan's door, the first tremors of what was to come stirred, a gathering storm no one would survive unscathed. The hushed murmurs of the inner circle filled the grand hall, the faint scrape of chairs against marble barely audible over the storm's dying rain outside. Caspa stood at the head of the long table, calm and composed, eyes sharp as a blade as he watched each man in turn. Every movement, every twitch of a finger, every flicker in an eye was catalogued, measured, and stored. The room had the precision of a predator's lair, yet beneath the surface, currents of tension shifted like a restless tide. Aloan lay in bed, eyes heavy with fatigue, unaware of the storm about to breach the sanctuary of her room. The dog, restless and alert, padded silently to the door, ears twitching. The smell of the men, the strange energy of their gathering, and something darker in the air stirred a deep instinct within it. Without warning, the creature slipped past the threshold, paws muffled against the cold stone, and disappeared into the corridor. Its movement was precise, controlled, as if it knew exactly where it needed to go. By the time the dog reached the grand hall, the first words of Caspa's measured lecture had begun to fall. The men barely noticed the subtle shift at first, a shadow slipping along the edge of their vision. Then came the low, guttural growl, reverberating through the polished hall like a warning bell. Heads turned, eyes widened. The dog stood at the threshold, fur bristling, tail stiff, teeth bared in a silent threat. Its gaze locked on Caspa's right-hand man, a man whose calm demeanor faltered for the first time in decades. The growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards, demanding attention, demanding recognition. Caspa's eyes narrowed, calculating. The man at whom the dog stared smiled faintly, a twitch of arrogance or perhaps unearned confidence. The dog barked sharply, a sound full of warning and instinctive intelligence. The room fell silent, all eyes on the animal, as if it had become the arbiter of truth and betrayal. Chairs scraped back, some men rising instinctively, but Caspa held a hand up, the faintest flick of command still carrying immeasurable weight. The dog's posture was rigid, muscles coiled like springs, eyes fixed, ears swiveled to catch the faintest hint of movement. Caspa stepped closer, voice low, measured, trying to reclaim the order he had meticulously built. "Down," he commanded, but the dog did not flinch. It did not waver. Its focus was absolute, unyielding, and unmistakably directed at the man who had thought himself untouchable. The right-hand man's confident mask cracked for a heartbeat, his hand brushing nervously near his coat where a concealed weapon had gone unnoticed by all but the dog. The growl was louder now, threatening, precise. Aloan, standing silently at the top of the stairs, felt her chest tighten. She had never seen the dog act like this, never so fierce, so protective, so alive with instinct. Caspa's mind raced, the pieces clicking into place with cold clarity. The animal, this muddy intruder he had condemned, was seeing what he could not. Something within the room, something hidden, had betrayed them, and the dog knew. Its teeth gleamed, its low warning growl cutting through the tension like a blade. In that instant, the unlikeliest sentinel had stepped forward, poised to defend them all. Caspa's hand moved with a speed born of decades of instinct, the familiar weight of his pistol pressing into his palm as he aimed at the dog. His sharp, cold gaze tried to assert control, to re-establish the order he had spent a lifetime enforcing. Down, he barked, voice slicing through the tension like a knife. The inner circle froze, every man caught between obedience and disbelief, eyes darting between the dog and their unflinching leader. The dog's ears flattened, its body coiling as if to spring, but it did not attack Caspa. Its growl deepened, vibrating through the hall, a warning carried on instinct too precise to be mere animal behavior. Then, in a heartbeat that felt like eternity, the dog leapt, not toward Caspa, but upward, toward the rafters where shadows clung to the beams like cobwebs. A metallic glint caught Caspa's eye just a fraction too late. The right-hand man, the one the dog had been fixated on, made a sudden, subtle movement, reaching for a concealed weapon hidden beneath his tailored jacket. In that instant, the dog landed on him, claws and teeth striking with surgical precision, forcing him to stumble back, breaking the rhythm of his motion. Chaos erupted. Chairs toppled, the polished marble floor reverberating with the crash of metal and panic. Caspa's eyes narrowed, tracking every movement as the dog lunged, snapping and biting, driving the would-be assassin toward the light, where his control could finally be reasserted. The inner circle's composure dissolved, men shouting, scrambling, the illusion of loyalty fractured in an instant. Caspa lowered his gun slightly, his mind racing, processing what had just happened. He had trained men to react, to protect, to anticipate, yet none had noticed the threat, none but this creature. The dog's instincts had cut through the layers of deception and duplicity that even Caspa had been blind to. It pinned the traitor, teeth bared and growling, muscles taut, refusing to release. The room was thick with tension, every breath held, every heartbeat loud. Aloan's small voice pierced the chaos from the top of the stairs. "Papa, he's trying to hurt you," she cried, pointing at the struggling figure beneath the dog. Her eyes were wide, fear and hope intertwined, and Caspa felt a pang of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: gratitude, sharp and unrelenting. The dog's attack was precise, controlled, almost methodical, as if it had studied the situation in a matter of seconds. Caspa stepped forward, moving between the dog and the chaos. The creature paused, eyes meeting his, as though acknowledging that he was still in charge, that it had served its purpose. When the traitor finally fell to the floor, disarmed and subdued, Caspa lowered his weapon completely. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. The mansion, the men, even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. And standing at the top of the stairs, Aloan pressed her hand to her mouth, staring at the dog that had saved them all, the same dog he had ordered removed not hours before. In that moment, Caspa's world shifted, the line between control and trust forever blurred. The hall was thick with the scent of tension and fear, the storm outside finally easing to a dull drizzle, while inside chaos still crackled like static electricity. The dog's teeth were pressed into the right-hand man's arm, keeping him pinned to the marble floor, muscles taut and growling with controlled fury. The traitor writhed beneath the animal, eyes wide with panic, every attempt to free himself thwarted by instinct honed sharper than any training Caspa had ever seen. Caspa stepped closer, surveying the scene with the cold precision that had made him untouchable for decades. His eyes flicked over the man's movements and then, almost imperceptibly, to the side where a small device glimmered in the dim light. A remote detonator, sleek and compact, clutched tightly in the traitor's trembling hand. The realization hit Caspa like a bullet. Every calculated threat he had imagined, every betrayal he had trained for, had been compounded by this single, silent instrument of death. The men in the room froze, some whispering in fear, others simply staring, realizing that the dog had not only defended its charge, but had prevented a disaster that no human eye had noticed. The hall, once filled with tension and bravado, now held a sharp, electric silence. Caspa's pulse steadied as he surveyed the dog, which maintained its hold with unshakable discipline, eyes unwavering, sensing every subtle movement, every flicker of intent from the man beneath it. Aloan's small voice echoed from the staircase, trembling but clear. "Papa, he was going to He was going to hurt everyone. Her words, simple yet loaded with the weight of truth, cut through the remaining tension. Caspa's gaze softened, just slightly, as he looked at the dog, this creature he had once deemed a liability. Its loyalty, its instinct, its uncanny perception had saved not only him, but everyone in the room. Caspa knelt briefly beside the dog, hand hovering over the creature's sleek, mud-streaked coat. "You saw what I could not," he murmured, a statement as much to himself as to the animal. The dog's ears flicked, acknowledging the attention without breaking its focus. The right-hand man, realizing the futility of his position, stilled under the dog's weight, the remote detonator clattering harmlessly to the floor. The inner circle exchanged glances, a mixture of fear and awe rippling through them. None had anticipated this turn of events. None had trusted instinct over protocol. And yet, the dog had acted with precision, insight, and courage that surpassed all human calculation. Caspa rose slowly, the weight of understanding settling heavily on his shoulders. He had underestimated the power of loyalty in a form he had never respected, and had ignored the possibility that instinct could outmatch training. Eloan descended the stairs cautiously, eyes wide as she watched the dog still poised over the subdued traitor. Caspa's expression, for the first time in years, softened in a way that felt almost unnatural to the hardened walls of his empire. He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes," he said quietly, voice rough with unfamiliar emotion, "protection comes from the places you least expect." The dog, sensing the shift, finally relaxed its posture slightly, tail brushing the marble, its silent vigilance still unwavering, the unlikely hero of the morning's revelation. Caspa stood over the subdued traitor, the weight of the morning pressing down like a physical force. The dog remained at his side, ears twitching, eyes still fixed on the man beneath its paws, tail swishing with restrained energy. For the first time in decades, Caspa allowed himself a long, measured breath, not of relief, not of fear, but of realization. The dog had sensed what he, despite all his experience and vigilance, had overlooked, the faintest trace of betrayal, the subtle tremor of fear and deceit that had clung to the traitor like a second skin. He knelt slightly, running a hand along the dog's sleek, mud-streaked coat. The animal's fur was damp, bristled from tension, yet beneath the tension lay an unwavering discipline, a loyalty he had never demanded but had been freely given. "You saw it," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. "Everything I could not see, everything I would have missed." The dog's ears flicked in acknowledgement, tail brushing against his leg as if in quiet agreement. The inner circle stood stiffly, watching, some with awe, some with apprehension. None dared move, none dared speak. Caspa straightened slowly, his gaze returning to the man on the floor. The traitor's eyes, wide and pleading, reflected the moment too late. The moment his ambition, his treachery, had been laid bare by something far beyond human cunning. Caspa's hand rested briefly on the pistol at his hip, but he did not need it. The lesson had been made painfully clear. "This," Caspa said, voice cutting through the thick tension like steel, "is the cost of betrayal." He gestured subtly, a motion practiced and final. The traitor's fate was sealed, a debt paid in full for the danger he had attempted to unleash. The dog shifted, nudging Caspa's side briefly, as if insisting that the lesson be remembered, the price exacted. Eloan stepped forward, timid yet brimming with quiet pride, her eyes meeting her father's. "He would have hurt everyone," she said softly. Caspa's eyes softened for a moment, and though he did not speak immediately, his glance toward the dog said more than words ever could. The animal had saved more than him. It had saved her, the house, the empire, the fragile balance of trust that even he had relied upon. Once the deed was done, Caspa signaled the men to stand down. Silence fell again, this time heavy with understanding rather than fear. The dog finally relaxed slightly, still vigilant, still watchful, but no longer coiled for attack. Caspa exhaled, a low, deliberate sound that seemed to release decades of tension from his shoulders. He looked at Eloan, at the small, muddy creature who had changed the course of the morning and allowed himself a rare, unguarded thought. Loyalty, courage, and perception were not limited to men trained in fear or skill. Sometimes, they came from the places you least expected, the hearts you least imagined capable. The debt had been paid, the lesson engraved, and in the quiet aftermath, Casper realized that the rules of his house, rigid and absolute as they had been, had just begun to bend. The mansion was quiet again, the storm outside long past, leaving only the soft drip of residual rain from the eaves. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, glinting off polished marble and casting long shadows across the hall. Casper walked slowly, each step deliberate, his mind replaying the morning's events with a clarity he hadn't expected. The dog padded beside him, head held high, tail swishing with restrained pride, muscles still taut, but now relaxed enough to suggest a rare form of satisfaction. He stopped at the small boutique in town, the kind of place he would never have thought to visit under any normal circumstance. Yet here he was, examining collars, his sharp eyes scanning each option with a meticulousness usually reserved for business deals and security plans. The clerk eyed him warily, sensing the authority in his presence, but unaware of the emotional calculus behind it. Casper selected a collar made of thick, black leather, polished and strong, and had it engraved with the Vance family crest, a mark of loyalty, protection, and belonging. He fastened it around the dog's neck with precision, the emblem gleaming under the shop's lights. The animal glanced up at him, eyes calm, ears relaxed, tail wagging gently. The drive back to the estate was silent, filled only with the faint sound of the dog's breathing and the occasional thump of its paws against the leather seat. Aloan waited at the top of the stairs, eyes wide, her small hands gripping the banister as if steadying herself against the anticipation in the air. When Casper entered the hall, the dog at his side now adorned with the family crest, her lips parted in a breathless mixture of awe and relief. He set the dog down, watching it move with quiet dignity, sniffing the familiar scent of the house, finally at ease. The animal had been a stranger, an intruder, a potential threat, and yet now it bore the symbol of the family itself, a silent guardian with allegiance sealed by courage and instinct. Casper turned slowly to Aloan, the girl who had defied him, who had believed in the impossible. He saw the fear, the hope, and the love reflected in her wide eyes, and for the first time in years, he allowed the barriers around his heart to crumble. He stepped forward, arms outstretched, and she ran into them, small and trembling against his chest. The embrace was long, unguarded, and full of the wordless understanding that they had survived, that loyalty and trust had been proven in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The dog settled at their feet, head resting against Casper's boots, tail brushing softly across the floor. In that quiet, sunlit hall, the mansion felt warmer, less like a fortress and more like a home. Casper's eyes lingered on the dog, the girl, the house itself, and a thought unspoken but deeply understood took root. Protection, love, and loyalty came in many forms, and sometimes, the most unlikely guardians were the ones who mattered most. The empire had survived, the traitor removed, and a new bond, unbreakable and enduring, had been forged in the quiet aftermath of chaos.